Hi, I wanted to thank Dr. Quint and Miki for allowing me to give you my presentation via webinar versus me being there in person. My medical team here actually didn't want me to travel because the last time I traveled, I ended up needing 2 liters of IV fluids, and that probably was not the best situation for me to be in last week. So I'm going to talk to you today about sharing your MRKH diagnosis from both the parent's perspective and what I think and my advice would be to parents, and also what my advice would be to those who are teenagers and young adults who are newly diagnosed or dealing with the first few years of diagnosis of MRKH. This video is actually downloadable from our website, so anyone can read it. And if you email me, I'll send you sort of maybe a template for a plan for how you can start navigating through this diagnosis of MRKH as a family. So since we're talking about families today, I thought I'd share with you some of my parents. This is my mom, Carolyn, my stepdad, Dave, and my awesome husband, Andy. And this is me with my dad just after I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I really owe my parents a debt of gratitude because I was a really angry teenager and I lashed out very much at my mom through my anger at being diagnosed with MRKH. And looking back at it from a perspective of someone who could easily be a mother, if not a grandmother by now, I wanted to share a little bit of that perspective because I understand how traumatic it is, both for those who are diagnosed with MRKH and for the family. It really is something that affects an entire family. And sometimes when you're newly diagnosed, it's really hard to see that MRKH is affecting somebody else too. And I think there's special roles and responsibilities that parents have to protect their children. And there are roles and responsibility that those who are affected by MRKH have in order to make sure that their wishes are taken into consideration throughout this process. So there's a lot of challenges for parents, right? You have a very new family dynamic. The dreams that your daughter had for her future may or may not have been totally crushed. The person she thought she was, she no longer is. And most people who are diagnosed with MRKH go through a very traumatic experience, and some of us even have post-traumatic stress disorder following a diagnosis of MRKH because it is such a shock to the system. Most people have never heard of MRKH before they're diagnosed. Most family members have never heard about it, and unfortunately the way the diagnosis occurs, a lot of OBGYNs have never really heard of MRKH either. They may have read about it once in a textbook, but they have very little experience treating those who are affected by MRKH. And I just want to show that it's typical, very typical for your MRKHer to go through and experience a vast array of emotions. They may be angry, they may be sad, they may be depressed. They may shut you out. And these are things that happen. You may have had a great relationship with your parents. You may have had a great relationship with your child, and all of a sudden you're shut out of her loop. She does not want to talk to you. And this is very, very typical. And in addition, she may show a few changes. She may just be like, la, 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 life is good. And that may be her way of really accepting MRKH immediately, or it might be a way that she's pushing MRKH out and not wanting to deal with it. And don't expect them to have the same feelings every day. I mean, people's feelings change at a whim's notice, and sometimes your child may be angry, and the next day she may be happy, and vice versa, and you never know what's going to set her off. Sometimes seeing people who are pregnant can really be traumatic, especially during high school. But these are things that you as a family will learn how to navigate through them, and MRKH is not something you fix. MRKH is something that you learn to live with and learn to thrive despite having this really traumatic diagnosis. So some of the challenges for you as parents really are separating yourself from your daughter. Remember that your daughter is not an extension of you. Your daughter and the person in your family who's affected by MRKH is their own person with their own rights to their body and rights to think about their diagnosis from their perspective, not necessarily from yours. And right now we're talking about girls who are diagnosed in their teens. There are additional caveats if you have a diagnosis at a much younger age, and unfortunately we're not really addressing that too much, but I can send you resources for how to talk to your daughters and how to talk to young adults who have MRKH, and I'm sure that Dr. Quince and her staff also have materials that you can use to help guide you through that if your daughter is much younger during the diagnosis. And I strongly believe that your daughter's wishes should be respected. Who does your daughter want you to share this with? What type of therapies does your daughter want? Does she want something right now, or does she want to wait? Giving your daughter as much control over her body and what's happening to her is the biggest gift you can give her. Because people who are diagnosed with MRKH just had their lives ripped out from underneath them, and most of us have an extreme sense of lack of control over anything that's going to happen to us in the future, and any amount of control that you can give back is going to help your MRKHer process this diagnosis of MRKH. This may seem obvious, but sometimes the affected individual doesn't want their brothers and sisters to know. They definitely don't want their step-siblings to know about it. So these are questions and dialogues to have to say, who do you want to know about this? Is it okay if I tell your brothers and sisters? Is it okay if I tell your stepsisters? Who do you want to know? Ask her if you can talk to your brothers and sisters. Some may say yes. Some MRKHers may say yes. Some may say no. And I was really struck by a conversation I had with a dad a couple weeks ago in Boston. And a picture of me and my dad is here to remind me to talk to you about the dad. This is an incredible father. This is someone who has really gone out of his way to help his daughter and support her in every way that he can. And this is just a little bit of snippet of what I'm talking about. So his daughter was diagnosed with MRKH 15 years ago, and she's now 30. He comes from a very large family. He has 10 brothers and sisters or so. None of them know that his daughter has MRKH because she's not ready to tell her extended family. She doesn't want her cousins to know, and she doesn't want her aunts and uncles to know. So think about it. I'm sure he could get tremendous support by talking to his brothers about MRKH and how they're dealing with it. But because his daughter doesn't want them to know, he has not talked to them about it at all. To me, that's one of the most precious gifts a dad can ever, or a parent can give their child. In addition, his parents don't know either. So no one in his family knows that his daughter's been diagnosed with MRKH. No one besides their immediate family knows that. And to me, that shows his strength of character to honor her wishes above those of his. Your friends. Does your daughter want your friends to know about it? Your friends are usually the people you go to when you need support. They're your support mechanism. But maybe your daughter doesn't get along with your friends' kids. Maybe your daughter doesn't want your friends knowing her business. These are questions and conversations to have as a family. Social media. Did you just say, hey, we're going to the gynecologist tomorrow? That can be intensely embarrassing to your daughter. First of all, talking about sex with your parents is the worst thing you could do. I don't even want to do it. I'm 47. And secondly, does she want that information divulged on your social media page? Those are things you need to think about. What's your mission? Is it to protect your daughter, or is it to get support for you? And how do you really keep those two separate? Same thing goes for pastors and other clergy members. They should be a fairly trusted place to go, but maybe your daughter doesn't want her priest knowing these intimate details of her body. And these are things you need to think about as you guys are creating your plan for talking about and disclosing your daughter's diagnosis of MRKH. And it's my strong opinion that your child really should be the one who says yes or no to each individual. Like I said before, it gives a little bit of power back to her to decide who gets to know about it. And it's going to increase her self-esteem, which is often lacking in women with MRKH. And because she has a little bit of control over what's going on with her body and her diagnosis. So these are things to consider as to what are the maybe healthiest outcomes, not necessarily for you, but for your child. So where can you find support? The most obvious place is right with your MRKH specialist. They generally have resources available. They may have social workers and counselors on staff that can help you and give you the support you need to help your daughter get through this diagnosis. What if your MRKH specialist is 6 hours away? There are a handful of MRKH specialists in this country, and the chances that you're going to have someone in your hometown are pretty low. But you're a specialist, and their allied healthcare workers can help you find someone in your area that also specializes in these types of conditions. And so they might be able to point you in the right direction to someone you can have a weekly conversation with to help get you through this diagnosis, as well as get your daughter through this diagnosis. In addition, there are online support groups. There aren't that many face-to-face support groups for mothers of MRKHers or dads of MRKHers, but there are some online groups for moms. There currently are no online groups for dads. So if you would think that you would participate in one, we'd be very happy to open up a group for dads only. I have a special fondness for dads, and know that they go through some very special challenges with this diagnosis. So we do provide one-on-one support for parents. We make very many phone calls and during each month, talking parents through some of the problems as they start navigating through this diagnosis. And we host a support group. It's a secret Facebook group for moms. So if you search Moms for MRKH, it won't come up. You actually have to be initiated by a secret handshake that we give you so that you can join this group, Moms for MRKH. And anyone who wants to join this who's not a member yet, please see Christina, and she will help sign you up for this group. So when you want to create a plan, first of all, just take a breath. If you're new to this diagnosis, decisions can wait. They don't have to be done tomorrow. MRKH is not something you fix. There are treatment plans that can fix certain aspects of the physical conditions associated with MRKH, but the emotional processes that you have to go to learn how to accept MRKH are not things that happen overnight. They're things that happen over years. And so just please take a breath and realize that nothing is urgent at this time. And we suggest to foster an open environment where your daughter can come to you without repercussion and talk about MRKH, and something that gives her control of her diagnosis. And we're going to kind of talk you through some of that. And I've touched on it briefly, and a lot of that is really giving her back as much control over her diagnosis as possible. So open a conversation, ask her what she wants. She may not have an answer for you tomorrow. Ask her again in a month. And part of your plan, say how many times how often do you want me to ask you about this? And then add one more because sometimes she may say no, and she may regret that, but may not know how to broach that with you again. Say, Mom, I really would like to do that. So those are something as a mom and as a dad, really it's your job to think about what your daughter's going through and maybe help her navigate through the system too. And ask her what she wants. The more you ask her, the better her self-esteem is going to be, and the more control you're giving her over her diagnosis. Give her time to work it out. Chances are she has no idea what she wants at this time. And then her ideas of what she wants may fluctuate on a daily basis. So day 1, she may want X, and day 2, she may not want X at all. And so those are things just to think about and give her time to work out what's best for her. And having a physical conversation with their parents about MRKH can be really embarrassing. There are times when it's not, and some MRKHers are perfectly open talking about this with their parents. I was not at all. It was embarrassing to me. I didn't want to talk about sex with my parents. I really didn't want to talk about MRKH with my parents. Had we had a plan and something written down where I could fill out a spreadsheet and say, or fill out forms and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I want, I think that would have been really helpful. And this dad that I talked to in Boston was the one who gave me this idea. He's like, what's your plan? I'm like, what do you mean, what's a plan? And no one else around the table had a plan either. To me, it was a phenomenal idea. And this is kind of what we're talking about, how to have a discussion about it, maybe through writing, so you don't have to have a physical one-on-one talk. So now we've kind of talked about the roles of parents. I want to talk now about the roles that you have as someone who's affected by MRKH. It's important to know that MRKH is not shameful. It's something you're born with. You had no control over it. Your parents had no control over it. There's nothing your mom did while she was pregnant with you that resulted in MRKH. It's just something that happens. And it happens in some other species too, in cattle, for example. Although it's not shameful, it's private. It's about a very intimate part of your life and an intimate part of your body. And as most people say, anything that's on a female below the belt is not really talked about too much. And it's hard. These are conversations that are very difficult to have. And I strongly feel that you have a right to decide who gets to know about MRKH, and you have a right to really dictate what your treatment options are. Do you want your family members to know? Is it important to you that they know or they don't know? Think about it. And don't just think about it for 2 minutes. Really think about it. Who do you want to know? Do you trust your brother Tim but not your sister Louise? Or vice versa? So who do you trust most in your family to know about your MRKH diagnosis? Is it everybody? Is it no one? Is it certain people? When you start talking to friends, things get a little bit trickier, because high school and middle school and those times in your lives, your friends sometimes go in fluxes, and you might be really good friends with somebody, and then in 6 months you might hate each other. And there can be repercussions for you for coming out and disclosing your MRKH diagnosis during these time points. So how you talk about it matters. Do you want to disclose it on social media? Do you want to talk about it only with your very, very, very closest friends? And once you go public, you cannot take it back. If it's out there on social media, it does not come back. If it's out there with your friends, you may have a little bit more control over it. Maybe someone will say, I'm not going to talk about this. But you really can never control what someone else will or won't do. And some people are just pot stirrers, and they like to talk about stuff like that. And, these are some things to think about as you're deciding who do you want to talk about this with. So the first question I want you to ask is, who do you trust? Do you trust your mom? Do you trust your dad? Do you trust Aunt Lizzie, your grandmother, your grandfather? Who's the person you trust the most? Because they're a good person to start practicing coming out about MRKH with them. Second thing I'm going to say is listen to your gut. Okay, and this is what I mean by that. How does your gut feel when you think about a person? Does your best friend Hope, when you think about Hope and you think about telling Hope about MRKH, how do you feel? Do you feel a little queasy, or do you feel perfectly relaxed? Your body's giving you clues as to whether or not you can trust somebody by talking about MRKH. Will this person keep your secret? Has this person broken a confidence before? The best indicator, that my favorite quote is by Maya Angelou, and it says, listen when someone tells you who they are the first time. If someone's already broken trust with you, the chances that they're going to do it again, especially after revealing to them that you have MRKH, are fairly high. And these are things you need to think about as you decide who you do and do not want to tell about MRKH. Because if this person talks about it publicly in high school and spreads it around high school, how are you going to feel about it? What's your action plan for that? Some teens have been bullied so much after somebody outed them that they had to change schools. And these are things to think about. What's your high school like? Is it a mean school? Is it a supportive school? What have other people who've come out with similar situations, what have they experienced? How are their personalities similar or different from yours? Are you a closed person? If you're a closed person, this comes out, people can use that as ammunition. If you're a person who says, I don't care what you say, it can't be used against you. So think about who you are and the culture of your school. Because some people have great experiences when they're open about it. And it really depends on a lot of different factors, some of which you have absolutely no control over. So how to create a plan from your perspective? You have a much harder role because you have to really think about how this diagnosis is affecting you, and this diagnosis is affecting you, and your parents can never understand how you feel about being diagnosed with MRKH because they've had children. They really have very little understanding what it's like to be in your shoes. and being given this diagnosis. That not only says, you can't carry your own baby, but it also makes you think about, who am I on a fundamental level? Am I a female? I don't have a uterus. I went through all of those things. I have 2 X chromosomes. Is that enough to make me female or not? I don't know the answer to that. And each of us has to decide for ourselves where we fall on that spectrum. And that's what makes an MRKH diagnosis a little bit more difficult, because it's not just a medical condition, it also affects who you are fundamentally as a person. So write down your feelings, whatever they are. Don't censor them. Write them down. Can you even identify what they are? It took me years to be able to identify anger in my body. I didn't know what it felt like. I couldn't say that this is anger. I couldn't put a feeling, an emotion to what I was feeling. Write it down. Are you all of a sudden much more withdrawn? How are you feeling? Do you want to lash out at somebody? Who? I chose to lash out at my mom. I lashed out pretty hard, and it really affected our relationship. Next thing you want to talk about and really think about is, who do you want to disclose this to? And we talked about this a little bit, but do you want, one brother to know or one sister to know and no one else? That's perfectly acceptable. Which of your friends do you want to know? Some, one, all? What about your aunts and uncles? Do you want Aunt Lizzie to know, but definitely not Aunt Bev? These are things to think about as you're going through this and putting that person in your mind and saying, how does your body feel when you think about that person? And it's perfectly acceptable for you to come up with your own list of people that you feel that you want to disclose this to. Maybe you only want to disclose it to 2 people, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's your decision. However, you have to communicate this to your parents, because if you make this decision on your own, you don't tell them what you want to have happen, they may make that decision for you. And they may tell people you don't want to be told, or they may not tell anybody. We don't know the answer, okay? But it's really important that you use this as an opportunity to talk to your parents about who you want them to disclose this to. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my mistakes and triumphs. My mom asked me if she could share my diagnosis, and I said sure. Not because I really wanted her to, because I didn't want to make any waves and I didn't want to deny her support system. I immediately regretted saying sure. And if I had been the person then that I am now, I would have gone back to her and said, sorry, Mom, I changed my mind. I don't want you to tell anybody about this. But I didn't do that. And because of that, I was pretty angry with her. We didn't have a plan. We were just winging it. And I was really angry with her that I let her do that. And it really was angry with me, but I took it out on her because I wanted to blame somebody for my bad choices. The other thing I would have done is, after my diagnosis, my mom said, do you want to go to a counselor? And I had such bad experiences with counselors as a younger adult, because I had some anger issues, that I said no. And once I said no, I felt like I couldn't say, I think I want to go see a counselor. And didn't really ask to do that. And what I wish my mom had done, and I wish we had a plan and I could have written it out, is I wish I could have said, ask me again. Don't just ask me once, ask me twice, ask me 5 times, ask me 10 times. I wish that had been the way it had gone down, but that's just not what happened in my family. And I'm sure that's caused some actually permanent damage to the relationship with my mom. And I also meant that I didn't really deal with MRKH before I went to college. It's probably bad news, because I ended up drinking too much and did things I probably would not do today, which eventually ended up with me being victim of date rape after a fraternity party that I never reported, because I just didn't want to relive the experience, and I had been drinking, and I was a football player, and I knew it was going to be ugly, and I just didn't want to go down that road. So after that, I became very withdrawn. I didn't really do much, and it was a really dark time in my life. And my self-esteem was really low. I almost flunked out of college. Luckily, I didn't. I just passed by the skin of my teeth. But really, how did I turn it around? Well, when I was in college, I would walk into a dorm and everyone would stop talking. And I knew that they were talking about me, and that was not cool. So I eventually found a group of friends that accepted me for who I was. I don't remember if I disclosed MRKH to them. Probably didn't. May not right away, but probably did later on, because these people ended up being my lifelong friends. And through them, I learned how to fake it. I emulated their behavior, and I said, hey, I can do this. And then I started getting some positive experiences. I had a really good time, and that helped to bolster my self-esteem, and little things started to snowball, and all of a sudden, I actually had self-esteem. It was amazing. And it's allowed me to successfully pursue a PhD, even though I almost flunked out of college. And after a few years, I woke up one day and I said, wow, I'm thinking about school. I'm thinking about my research project. I'm not thinking about MRKH. It's not the first thing that I thought of when I woke up in the morning. And I realized I'm living life. I'm not living an MRKH life. I'm living my life. And much later, I became thankful for every roadblock that was thrown up in my life. I became thankful my parents got divorced when I was 4, because I had to face a major life challenge as a very, very young child. I became thankful for MRKH. Every single roadblock that I've hit has changed my life and made me a better person, taught me something I needed to know. MRKH, my diagnosis, has made me kinder. It has made me more compassionate. And I don't have any regrets for having MRKH. I didn't end up pregnant as a teenager. Woohoo! And I got to live a beautiful life. I mean, I had so many things going on that are positive. And these challenges really prepared me for my worst challenges, which is being denied tenure, and then a year later being diagnosed with colon cancer. So without these roadblocks that were put in my life, I would not be prepared to deal with my current roadblock that I'm dealing with right now. It's just some of the amazing opportunities I've had in my life. I've been able to travel throughout the world. I lived in Hawaii. Our latest recent long-term trip was to the Philippines. We spent 2.5 weeks in the Philippines. I've been to Borneo. I've been to Greece. I've been all throughout Europe. And I still love to travel. It's one of my passions. And my blog is actually called Traveling Geneticist, because that's one of the things I love to do. But before I end, I just want to thank everybody in this room for being here today and listening to my talk. And I hope you've gotten something out of it. Email me, and we're going to put up our plans on our website and also on all of our social media sites as files, so that you can download them and start having a conversation about sharing and about other aspects of being diagnosed with MRKH. But I want to thank you all for all the love you've shown me over the last several months. I would not be where I am today without you. On my worst days, you brightened my life. The worst day I was feeling, I got 5 packages and letters in the mail, and I couldn't believe it. I turned to my husband and I started crying, and I just said, how can I be sitting here feeling sorry for myself when so many people are giving me love? And I chose to embrace every single piece of love you guys gave my way, and you've made my journey lighter and brighter. And as my friend Meredith, who's a Quaker, says, you hold me in the light. And I give you all of my love back. And thank you so much for making this journey and taking the bad parts of the journey away and making it a much more positive experience. I love you all. Thank you. And now I'm sure that if we can get the phone system worked up, I can field some questions. And I know that Jacqueline Schultz is going to talk to you a little bit about some of her experiences that she's had coming out about MRKH, because although she's had some positive things, there's also been some really tough things that she's had to deal with. And I know that there are other people in the audience who have some experiences of their own. So please ask away, and I'm sure people will be willing to answer your questions. Thank you.